to just set the scene into exactly what we're going to be discussing today, allow me to introduce my guest right from my far left. I'm joined by Emmanuel Muniu. Emmanuel Muniu is a farmer. He's going to tell us a lot more on what he farms. He says looking towards a lot into agriculture, but how do you call that agriculture? Ideally, it's more into a diversified greenhouse and more into the county level, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah, we'll come to that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us. Next to me is, of course, a familiar face. Most of you would recognize as Stephen Mutoro, who's the CEO of the Consumer Federation of Kenya, COFEC. Thank you so much for joining us. And, of course, we'll be relying on you a lot, of course, in trying just set the stage into looking towards. There's just been a lot of interest, especially into people going back into the farms. But before we come to you, back to you, Emmanuel. Yep. Yes, you mentioned that you farm vegetable capsicums, looking towards Nakuru, Kiambu, Kisaju. Just give us an overview on what you do and how has it been in the business.
Just to give you a brief summary of my journey, I started about 2 years ago. I had a full-time job in a bank. Then I decided to leave. And purely was because of the money. It was around the time when agriculture had this hype that you can make $1 million bob from 1 acre. And to my rude shock, I didn't make that 1 million. My partner and I made pure losses. And but through that experience is when we saw the opportunity that we can plug in and play as young people in the agriculture scene. Mm-hmm. So ever since, we've had a few projects, and right now we're working on about 10-acre piece of land in Kisaju, and fully mechanized, and we're starting to see some positive changes in the agriculture that we've been practicing over the last 2 years.
Emmanuel, just a bit more detail. You mentioned that now you're a team. Are you together with maybe your friends or people you've actually business partners that you've gone into, and how does it work, especially in the splitting of responsibilities? And
initially, we were bootstrapping ourselves. We used our savings and put it in the farm. Unfortunately, as you can see, we didn't have that kind of coffers to push us for a very long period of time. So I have one partner who's my technical partner in the business. Then now we're able to approach investors, people who are willing to go into farming but don't have the time or the know-how to do it. So we plug in and have a strategic alliance where we have someone who has a farm and probably the resources to put in the farm, but they don't have the time and the capacity to be able to run the farm. Mm-hmm. So we come in as your partner, we do the management of the farm and the marketing of the produce. So in that way, we have a symbiotic relationship where the young farmers who might not necessarily have the resources can be able to practice the agriculture using other people's resources, but also now do the management and the production. Okay. Yes.
Later on, we're going to come to you, and of course, we'll be playing a few pictures for you of different farmlands that we captured, actually, of farmers there growing barley, some growing tea, some growing coffee. But we noticed there's kind of a trend towards a little more small scale, a little more of the veggies, you say capsicums, the onions and tomatoes. While that will be the case. So we're going to come to that question shortly. But Mr. Mutoro, thank you so much for joining us today. But just set as a scene, I know there's been a lot of interest. When you look at towards the market, of course, there are many farmers. Emmanuel was saying he has been working in the bank for like about 2 years and now has moved into to the farms. From kind of a regulator perspective, how do you see this panning out in the country?
I think, first of all, this is a very interesting topic, very timely. I would like to thank NTV for focusing on this issue. Now, first, you're a consumer because there's something to consume. So we're very sensitive about what's happening in the market. And it's very interesting that most of the products that would actually have been farmed in this country are being imported from other countries. So obviously, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of employment creation and all those kind of issues. But having said so, I think we need to look at this issue very broadly from the policy makers. The Ministry of Agriculture, for example. When you talk about agribusiness, what are we exactly talking about? Is it business in agriculture, and what does it mean? And, there are all aspects of marketing. One of the issues that we have to protect consumers about in the agribusiness industry is what you could call false representation in marketing. Yeah. People are coming out, there are too many companies, coming up and they want to make the pyramid scheme kind of cartel, because obviously there's a lot of demand in this kind of a sector. We've seen companies sell land also promise what is almost impossible in terms of returns after 6 months. So it's a positive thing, but it has a lot of challenges, especially on the consumer issues. Because as we speak, actually we are mulling taking one of the agribusiness entrepreneurs to court because of fraud. So this is a very interesting time that we need more entrepreneurs in agribusiness. But at the same time, this is an industry that is poorly regulated. You know, we have the AFA, Agriculture, Food, Fisheries Authority. Whether it regulates this kind of industry, we do not know. Now, when you have players without a referee, you know you can score anywhere. And of course, say you have 1-4-2 or 2-4, depending on which side you are. So I think it'll be very interesting to look at where does the consumer come in terms of quality, for example. When you talk about greenhouses, what about quality issues? Are we also, issues about pesticides, for example? Are we ingesting more of this? Who's really monitoring all this? Now, is it about profit? Is it about employment? I mean, where are we with all these issues? So I think it will be a very interesting topic to look at in terms of, just from the farm to the fork. Where does the consumer come in? Where is the value addition? Is it an industry that can create employment? I mean, all those kind of questions. But again, at what expense and whose expense? We are saying it should never be at the expense of the consumer.
All right. Oh, you're bringing a lot of issues there. First, I would want to take up on you on that, especially when you mentioned about, a bit of the agribusiness merchant, of course, that perhaps have not played the game quite well into that. And of course, we'll be posing that question. We'll be expecting, of course, Diamond Property Merchants in studio shortly, just trying to get their perspective on how it is to do business on that side. But from where you sit, I'm really happy with how you started in this, in the sense that, you mentioned that it's actually a need. There is a need for us to have more farms, but we don't see that encouragement, especially for people to actually go to the farms and take part in production.
Actually, Laban, I must mention that a responsible consumer body like ours would actually be very interested what happens upstream at the market, because it actually comes down to the downstream to the consumer. The consumer consumes what's available on the market. Now, all those factors, actually, there's something called pass-through costs, where, for example, the cost of input is very high. And I say this with a lot of respect, for example, to Kilimo House technocrats, from the minister to the principal secretary. The only time we hear, for example, about this kind of talk, or when the Minister for Agriculture comes out, is possibly when they're talking about subsidy program, how much they're spending, how much they're, whatever. But we do not see proactive policies. For example, what is the policy do we have on food security? Because what the kind of people we're talking about is actually food security policy. Do we really have it? And if we do, who is implementing it, at what level? Because what the likes of farmers like Emmanuel, and I'm so happy to see youthful farmers, what they need is incentives from government. Because if we can produce more, have sufficient supply, then of course demand will be lower to the advantage of the consumer. But as it is, we operate on seasons. Because, we can't do irrigated agriculture, we rely on the rains. So if greenhouses would work, for example, it would be a good concept. But I think it's important that the market is cushioned, and then the market is also regulated. Because this idea of free for all, like we are seeing, you'll wake up today. And I can tell you, Laban, it's very interesting. Farming in Kenya is like parenting. Nobody goes to any training to become a parent. You just wake up tomorrow, probably your father or your mother. I think it's very interesting. Even in farming, people just come up, no training, they are not very clear about their business plans, so it's like a gamble. And this is actually presenting an opportunity and a threat at the same time. So it'll be very interesting that we need to provide policy direction, but again, we need proper regulation of the industry. We need some sort of certainty in terms of production, in terms of quality and issues like that. I would tell you, for example, as we proceed with this conversation, when you come up and say you're an entrepreneur in this kind of agribusiness, and you say, for example, I can sell you land at 250,000, and then after 6 months, you'll be earning X amount of money. Now, surely, what certainties do you have to know that the production will be not affected by issues, for example, the cost of input, taxation, and all those kind of issues, even weather? So we've seen cases where entrepreneurs in agribusiness are actually becoming more or less, for lack of a better word, fraudsters, or they're being labeled fraudsters, either because they never did proper visibility study, or they are not truthful. They want just to make a killing and, of course, give the industry a bad name. But I think going forward, just to meet the high food demand, agribusiness is the way to go. But it must be guided by proper policy direction. It must be regulated. I think consumers must also be assured about the quality of output. And, of course, also the continuity, because you will find some seasons when we have a lot of tomatoes, for example. Then there's some season when we completely don't have. What does that tell you? There's a problem with storage. So there's a lot of issues I think that we need to look at if we really need to keep this industry proper and make sure that we can have some sort of certainty. For example, we can predict the price. Yeah, because on occasions or seasons when we don't have production, of course the prices shoot up almost abnormally. You have one tomato, for example, which will cost sometimes ridiculously more than 50 shillings. So, or onions or whatever it is. So I think it's an industry that, if I were at Kilimo House, I would really be very interested to discuss with the people at Treasury to look at how do we help the industry, first in terms of financing, two in terms of cushioning against risks, and three in terms of predictability, regulating the industry and making sure that investors, because investors like Emmanuel and anybody else would love to, but I think because of the risks, because of the fraud that we're seeing, I think this is an industry under a lot of threats, and it'll be very interesting to see moving forward what kind of mitigation measures would they have.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Mtoro. And just to mention, I mentioned to you earlier that we're having, of course, Diamond Party is just trying to delve a bit deeper into this discussion, just looking towards this whole sector in the agribusiness space with that interest that is drawing. We'll, of course, delve a little deeper into those issues. But allow me to now introduce one of our guests who's also come in. That's Edwin Kiharanga, who's the Group Marketing Director from Diamond Property Manches. Thank you so much, Edwin. You just didn't miss a lot. We're still on the first gear,
Thank you.
Still on the first gear, and we're just trying to really delve a bit deeper into understand this whole agribusiness space in the country. But from where you sit, if you just tell us about your company and, of course, the interest you've seen so far amongst Kenyans into going back to the farms.
Thank you very much, Laban. Diamond Property is among the pioneer companies that opened up the space of agribusiness. But along the line, of course, we had done a bit of feasibility studies, and there are a few things we need really to bring to light. Number one, it's more or less a partnership between three parties. One, we have on the other side a land selling company. We have the agribusiness company, which is a combination of a greenhouse selling company and a pool of experts in the name of agronomist. And then, of course, we have the investor like Emmanuel, who would want to buy into the idea. At the beginning, of course, the idea was well thought out, depending on the information we got from the experts. The reason is you have a greenhouse. The first question is, what is the average yield per greenhouse? Number one. Number two, from the expert's point of view, which kind of crops and depending on different seasons would you produce at any given time that will guarantee you a market and probably a guaranteed return. Not necessarily a guaranteed return of a given figure, but at least you are somehow assured that there's no loss. So we had a bit of experts involvement, and by the time we started our first season as Diamond Property Merchants, at least the line was clear. But over the past couple of months, if not years, of course, we've had a few issues coming up, and maybe Diamond as as an industry leader, one of the key things is, where did we miss the mark? Because at the end of the day, there's a merger between real estate and agribusiness picked up momentum over the past couple of years. As much as the idea is exciting the market, where did we miss up the mark? And I can clearly tell you the ball might have been dropped at the following point, where number one, there is Diamond, the land selling company. My main objective is initially to dispose of my properties and probably spike up demand in the market. Then, of course, we have a greenhouse selling company who also have an objective. In this particular case, what is the main objective? To spike up uptake of the greenhouse structures. Now, if you do not involve the expert in this at this particular level, who are now the agronomists, because these are the key determinants. The greenhouse company does not do selling and production of crops. They have no idea, determination of seasons and which kind of crops have a specific demand in the market. Now, so if I'm just an ordinary land selling company, and my work is to just partner with the Lab and Cliff Ontario, whose work is to sell greenhouses without any idea or bearing of how the market plays in terms of the yield, then you're into a shrewd shock. But I can tell you for a fact, from this we're doing actually the third season, if we got it right at the beginning, and that is, first of all, from the expert, the agronomist, who are actually in touch with the crop production, the yield, and the market, and then the rest falls into place. You have the land that's available, and the land selling company has also to be committed towards production of the infrastructure. Trust you me, it's expensive, it's costly. I think Emmanuel will tell you doing it on your own has its own cost. You have to set up your water infrastructure, you have to set up cost of power, you have to fence your product, you have to till it and provide the normal farm management. But when you bring it into the large scale setup where you have the land provided, the land selling company has provided the infrastructure in terms of water being piped to every plot, and that is a cost. And then, of course, you have electricity provided, security provided. Your work as an entrepreneur is to just come in, plug and play. Then it makes it easier.
You make it very easy. I want to find out from Emmanuel indeed if it's that easy. So hang on to that thought. We're going to come back to you very briefly to just delve a bit more detail. Of course, if you just tuned in, we'll look at matters agribusiness investment, and we have an expert panel right here in studio. This is AM Live in the Market. Don't go too far. We're going to just take a quick break. And greetings. This is AM Live in the Market, and today we have a look into a special feature into agribusiness investment. My name is Laban Clifford Serio. Well, I'll not be alone in this. I have an expert panel in studio. Just beginning with my far left, we have Edwin Kiaranga, who's the Group Marketing Director from Diamond Property Merchants. Next to him, of course, I would say our case study for the day. His name is Emmanuel Muniu, who's an entrepreneur and a farmer who's largely into the agribusiness space. And just to get a feel from what it is for you as a consumer, what do you stand to gain, what are some of the legal implications of this, we're honored to be joined by Mr. Stephen Mutoro, who's the Secretary General of the Consumer Federation of Kenya. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we, of course, began with setting the scene and just looking towards what this exactly means. Let's go to Emmanuel. You are in the space. First of all, you're going to talk about this youth factor. You know, some mentioned that it's encouraging to see that there's a young person who's out in the farms. How's it been for you for the last 2 years after leaving your banking job to go back into the farms, and the risk that Mr. Kiranga mentioned? How do you mitigate against that?
First of all, there are a couple of challenges going into farming. One, if you don't have a background in farming, you do not understand the language that is spoken by farmers and the requirements that you need to get into the farming business. First, you really need to understand your business. Just like any other entrepreneur in your space, you have to understand what do you need, what are the requirements that are necessary for your success. So part of my failure as an entrepreneur farmer was going into the space, not really knowing and doing my very thorough background on what entails in farming. So I'll just give you my story. I started with a farm in Subukia. That's about 150 kilometers from here. And I was working in Nairobi. So I had a full-time job, but I got this person who told me, you know, I can manage a farm for you, and I'll be able to run it for you, and you'll get this amount of money after this period of time. So one, he would just tell me things, and it sounded very technical, but I just send the money because I wouldn't know what it is. So in that aspect, I was conned out of my very hard-earned cash just because I didn't understand what this guy was saying. Two, the distance. I was not able to go to my farm as often as I would to be able to check up on the progress of my crop. So with that, those were two very critical issues that are facing farmers today, especially young farmers. One, we want to get into the space without really doing our due diligence. Two, we want to be telephone farmers. And farming, just like any other business, you need to be very, very present. You cannot expect anyone to run it for you. And just to go back to what Edwin said, now that is where they came in. And I think for me it was part of a threat. I could call them my competitors because we are doing the direct farming as well as they do. So for them, they take the management bit of it. So as a farmer, no one was taking care of my farm in Subukia. I had to do the due diligence. I had to follow up. And I didn't have the time since I had a full-time job and very limited leave days that I could take in a year.
So what you're trying to say is it's very hard for somebody to have a full-time job and still at the same time, make a call to, say, your tenant at your farm in Subukia and to tend to the crops.
Now that goes to the third point, which is management. Management is one critical factor, which Edwin has mentioned, the expert. You need to have an expert in your farm, either an agronomist who's full-time there, but are you able to afford an agronomist? Or a very good farm manager, someone who's been has done the craft for a long period of time, understands what's being done. And you have to incentivize this person who's working at your farm to be able to do the due diligence as you would have done as a owner. So yes, there is there's a possibility of you succeeding as a long-distance farmer, but how often do you get a very good employee who'll be able to sit at your farm, take it seriously as you would have? So,
do you want to talk about the losses that you incurred before you, started sailing through?
Yes, sure. Case in point, Nakuru again. The proposal I got was I'll get 1 million shillings after 18 weeks, which is about 4.5 months, which sounds reasonable because the projections were you'll get 15 tons of onions, because I was doing onions. You'll get 15 tons of onions and selling it at 70 shillings a kilo. That's about 1.15 million. That sounds really good. And according to this person, you just needed to put 200,000 into the farm and you'll reap the 1.1 million shillings. Unfortunately, we ended up investing about 350,000, my partner and I, which is more, almost double the amount of money. And then we only got back 60,000. As opposed to the 15 tons we were expecting, we only got 600 kilos, sorry. So you see with that, you can see the gap. One, we just sent money more than we ought to have. And actually coming back to look at it, the cost of production for an acre should be less than 200,000 if done well. So you see, that is a challenge that you have as farmers.
Mr. Mtoro, those deals sound very good on paper. I mean, who would not want to get 1.1 million shillings in 18 months?
I think that's how we come in. If you listen carefully to Edwin and possibly Emmanuel, you will see the common point that, of course, for us is a risk as consumers. If you're looking at now the entrepreneur, the land seller, the agronomists, people managing greenhouses, but either through proxy or by themselves, I think for me, if you ask them, the two gentlemen, who's the regulator, who's the referee between the two of them, chances are they do not tell you that they are not regulated. Actually, they will say they regulate themselves. Now, self-regulation works sometimes, but oftentimes it doesn't work. And for me, that's a more interesting bit of it. If the sector, as good as it is, as lovely as it is, and knowing how lazy the middle income class Kenyans are.
Is it? What do you mean?
Please forgive me. Because Laban, I think Laban Cliff will be able to watch this, and I'm sure the next thing, he's going to sign up for this program. And I say this because most of the complaints we've got about this industry is actually the middle class. Some are embarrassed. They actually don't want to come out publicly. Say, look, guys, I was conned. And because I do this kind of a job, it's so sensitive, I don't want even to be known that I was conned.
Would you rather that people left their jobs and just directly go into the farms?
I think I'm one person, by the way, who loves talking about the market. You need to have a job. You need to do some side hustles and all those kind of things. Nothing wrong. But I think this idea of peer pressure, because Emmanuel is your friend, and you think he succeeded, or he tells you the sweet part, and leaves out the 60K against 1 million he was expecting. Now, one of the interesting things about peer group pressure, you find people pulling together resources because they work together. Next thing, end month, they are actually signing up a check to an entrepreneur, and he's so happy to receive that, but they have not done due diligence. None of them actually would be like, spare time to get more details about what they do. So one of the groups that has been actually getting a lot of beating is the middle income class, or the middle class, so to speak. Why am I saying this? Is that our friends, and honestly, I must say it on air, I want to congratulate our friends from Margin Properties. We have not received a complaint from them. But they would, I'm sure they know that there are so many complaints around this sector. Which means, and the problems go around marketing of the concept. You know, we use very flowery promises. Section 12 of the Consumer Protection Act of 2012, which maybe Emmanuel or possibly Edwin might not be aware of, actually does not allow false representation in marketing. When you tell me, It actually becomes a contract. When you tell me that if I invest amount X, I'll get amount Y after period Z, that's a contract, verbal or otherwise. Now, if you you are not able to give me that after the period that we've agreed, then obviously it becomes a false representation.
Great.
So I think we are falling prey of all this, and I don't also not want just to look at the negative bit of it, but all I'm saying is that people should be careful investing in this industry. COFEC is there, experts are there. Please take a moment before you put your money into these land selling companies and greenhouses. Take a moment, just consult an expert.
Great. Edwin, it's okay to burn your fingers, as Emmanuel did, but not burn your hands in the entire process as you go along. So how do you mitigate against this?
One thing that you might not know that in our first ever project, just like Emmanuel, Diamond Property Merchants burned its fingers, but we made sure that we cushioned our investors. Why? Our first service provider made the deal look so sweet. Someone would have said, like Mtoro says, false representation of facts, because we approached the wrong dealer. We approached a greenhouse selling company, which told us, you know what, all you need is have a greenhouse. You have 6 months of transaction, and a greenhouse will give you 250,000. And that's if you're to trust back to our initial marketing concept. Bring in 300,000 for a greenhouse. You have 6 months on your plot, and you have 250. That was a greenhouse selling company, and the excitement was there until after a while we got heads up from experts like now Chris, who told us, listen, this concept is well thought after, but now let's discuss figures. You'll need at least a month to set up a normal greenhouse. You'll need another month to incubate seedlings. You'll need 3 months for maturity. That is 5 months already. And then you need to harvest for at least 4 months. You're talking about 8 to 9 months. Now tell me, what magic are you doing to recoup 250,000 per season? Now the problem is because I had already marketed the concept, and our peers across the board were already looking and copy-pasting, which we Kenyans are good at. They copy-pasted the initial wrong model. So what I did first is to backtrack, call my investors, and correct the script that, listen, I had told you that this is it, but I now have experts who've told me that this is it. Now listen, because the facts were misrepresented, we are willing to go in our pocket and cover you for the first season because the facts were laid bare as it is. But season 2 going forward, these are the facts. Now that is unknown to the market, but that is what we did.
Why not call the experts right before when you were just beginning?
Like in any other, like in any other business, when we came in first, I'm a former banker as well. I had done a bit of greenhouse investment during my banking days, and it was a matter of a greenhouse would give me this amount of money. What if I merged greenhouse into a 500 plots in Isinya? So I went to the company that had supplied my greenhouse. That was the wrong approach. I would have gone to the experts. Thank God experts now came in because this concept was out there and they could see the gaps and they could see where we were headed. So experts came in and they knew Diamond is a reputable company, and we partnered with experts, and that's why we were able to mitigate immediately on season 2. However, the market out there had just copy-pasted the initial mistake that we had done and they ran with it blindly. Hence the current quagmire.
We'll come to that, and I like where this discussion is headed. And I know our viewers can see reactions online, and some of us would want to call in. I see the numbers right on your screens out there. So please feel free to reach out to us. Give us your experience. Are you a farmer? Are you a consumer? Are you a potential farmer, I should say? Or maybe the middle class that is maybe looking towards that is lazy and not willing to go into the farms. But you mentioned an expert opinion. You mentioned getting the opinion of somebody who's been there and understand the entire space. We're honored to be joined by Chris Mukinde. Chris Mukinde is an agronomist, and you understand all these periods. You know, we're talking about greenhouse, we're talking about seed maturity levels, we're talking about the weather, we're talking about the risk. So Chris, from where you sit, say for instance, the agribusiness merchants be selling a lot more over-promising than what is on the ground?
Well, thank you. Yes, the initial concept, the way it was sold, was a bit over-promising because certain processes were given very short time, which was not practical. However, when we started working with Diamond Properties, we are there now to rectify the initial mistakes. As far as I'm concerned, the concept is still very good, a concept which is has a lot of potential and future. In this country, in the past, we had the cooperative movements, which brings economies of scale to small people. This concept is more or less similar, only that because now you have a contracted pay to the investor, we are able to eliminate the weaknesses or the corruptions that came in the cooperative movement.
This concept always sounds very interesting, especially when you see it out there. And you get a whole splashing news that 1.1 million, make 1.1 million in 18 months across social
18
media.
weeks.
18 weeks.
Yes.
So, just paint for us a picture. Is this first of all possible? And what is the behind the scene? What is the information that doesn't really quite get out there in terms of, like putting the seed into the soil?
Yeah, the concept as it is good. The issue is when it comes to the practice of growing a crop, there are processes which must happen. In terms of the returns that are possible, yes, it's possible to get that kind of money, but then the time frame becomes longer, not within the short time frame that was given like 6 months. So when we have come in like now, we are dealing with 8 or 9 months for one season. And the contract that we have now with clients together with Diamond is based on season to season, on 8 months, 9 months. And once the season is done, then we are doing an evaluation of what exactly we have been able to attain. And then based on that, we are able to move forward to the next season. Unlike a situation where we theoretically promise something, and then actually on the ground, we are not able to do it. So now we move season by season and we evaluate. As it is, yes, it's possible, but the time frame should be longer.
All right. Emmanuel, what do you wish you knew before? Of course, right now, you're still into it, 2 years on. What do you wish you knew before you just got into agribusiness?
First of all, is just to break down the notion that, let me give you an analogy. Would you read a book about swimming, then you just say, now I'm good, I can go into the swimming pool and swim? Absolutely not. It's the same thing with entrepreneurship and agribusiness. I read a lot of proposals, a lot of internet articles about how to do it and thought, I'm good at it, so I'm going to do it. Just as Edwin has, excuse me, just as Edwin has said, experts. Someone who has been there, someone who knows how to do it. I wish I consulted people who have done agriculture. These are people who would call them agronomists, or just someone who's been there, done it, and even go to a farm that they're actually doing the actual farming and say, this is what I want and this is what I can achieve. So I wish I consulted before I started.
Mr. Mtoro, maybe perhaps this can work a bit different.
Yes.
Couldn't we even have, say, the middle class? Because maybe they're good at just making the money, but not really good at perhaps getting into the farms and ensuring they can actually produce. So we create a pool or create a fund that will actually now be the ones to invest into the likes of diamond property merchants.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the three gentlemen, and I'm happy that they have been fairly honest. If you come to think of it, the whole of this business is about theory and practice. Now, theory is all good. And it appears before, of course, like any other business, before you pick yourself, maybe you must fall several times. So it's more about, I mean, the question you asked Edwin and the answer he gave. Obviously, he said he went back to his pocket to cover for that. I mean, that's like gambling business. That you are coming out in business, but you really have not ascertained the risks. In sectors like the insurance or even banking, that I think the two gentlemen have been, when a depositor puts in money and it gets lost, there is a deposit protection fund. Even in the insurance sector, there's a reinsurance, that kind of element. What is missing in this sector is how they can cover themselves, both as the market and even their consumers. I'm saying so because, Laban Cliff, I'm saying this because I'm talking from experience. This kind of business is like a balloon. I mean, if it does well, so it does. When it bursts, you're in trouble. And like one company that is in question, the amount of refunds that people are seeking refunds, they operate like a bank. They need people's money so they can be able to invest level 2 or level 3. So where you find over 90% are seeking for refund because they've discovered you're not a honest business, obviously you crumble. So this is one interesting bit. But I wanted to conclude with this, even as I answer your question. There is a very important role of media in this. Of course, COFEC respects media so much. But again, when you have cases where media personalities are used, like in the case in point, a celebrity radio presenter is actually part of the business, and it actually complicates it because people trust you as Laban Cliff. You make an announcement, we have no reason as your viewers to doubt you. If you say diamond properties, for example, are good, we definitely are all going that side because even the TV people said these guys are good. Now, that amounts, in the case in question, that amounts to deceptive advertising. When you tell people things, the expert agronomist actually talked about over-promising. In law, that's called deceptive advertising. It has consequences. If you overpromise and you underdeliver, what are the consequences? You are killing one, the industry, and two, you're also subjecting yourself to a lot of trouble. So all I'll be calling on this, even for the middle class, is that people out there, including myself, I would love to invest in this this industry. But people are looking for honest dealings. People are looking for accountable because people say it's not very easy to do business in this country without being honest and that kind of thing. But I like what he said. Tell people the right time. Tell people about the right season. Grow slowly, but be sustainable. Why would you make a killing for a year or two, then I think crash after 2-3 years? So I think, in a nutshell, the middle class have no time. Their time is not to go and check all. Their time is to make money, and even more money beyond their kind of jobs. So all they are looking for, by the way, they can even employ a manager. They can come together as a group. So employing a manager is not a problem. Even fund farming is not a problem. What they are looking for, if you come out there doing business, please, for heaven's sake, do a credible business. And you can only do that if there's a referee, there's a regulator. This industry does not have a regulator, and if my good friend Mr. Willie Bett is watching as a policymaker, one of the things he must do, we need a regulatory mechanism, either under AFA or any other arrangement where we can regulate this industry, because it has huge potential. It actually can create a lot of jobs, it can create a lot of food security and all these kind of things. So let's not kill the industry because of a few fraudsters. Let's regulate it.
All right, I think we'll take that as a takeaway. Of course, just looking towards how the government can come in and regulate the sector. Edwin, I look at your job as likened to, walking on eggshells, because, you've had, the industry would have a different perception, but you're trying, of course, to create a name and make things different. Yeah. So from where you sit, how are you doing it differently?
There are 4 things we've done. Number 1 is total involvement, because as Chris has said, as Mtoro has said, there's no regulation. There's no way Edwin will sit down with an expert, do our own math on paper, and bring it upon you as the investors. Then tomorrow wake up and realize things haven't worked. Then we sit behind the table, discuss the numbers, and push the man to you. What we've done is, I have a pool of 1,000 investors. Mine was to source for an expert. And then we've agreed with them, they'll not just do an arm's length investment. We'll have time-to-time discussions. He will come and share the expert's view, the emerging trends in the market. They literally participate. They know what goes behind the scene. Meaning, if today we did tomatoes or we did onions and the market has still onions and we have to do something else, they somehow have an idea. And then from the pool of 1,000 investors, we'll have probably 10% of them forming a body of a committee, so to speak, meaning if there's any emerging trend and issue in the market, it's not Edwin as Diamond Properties sitting with the expert. It is the pool of committee sitting with the expert to discuss their investments. And then when they are sold to, it will be them cascading down to the other 1,000 investors. In the previous cases, it was Diamond and an expert discussing your money on your behalf and then passing down to you. What a guarantee do you have that Diamond might not have a cut in it? So you must be involved. So 1, there's participation of the investors through a committee. That cuts off part of the doubt. Number 2, we have insurance. Insurance in this particular case covers the concept for 2 things. 1, you're never assured that you'll have the yield at the end of the season. In case there's crop failure due to pests and all that, or there's vandalization of the greenhouse, because you need that structure, then you have an insurance company that takes care of that. So basically, with those 2 things, involvement of these investors and having insurance coming in, and to know that at least there's communication, because a season will run for 8 months, like he said. But again, we need to communicate. Don't just deposit your money, then disappear, then show up after 8 months. There is time-to-time communication. Transplanting has just been done. We are now harvesting. We have a new emerging trend that in the next season, we are likely to do French beans for the European market. So it's there. Now, through the involvement, we have a few other smart investors who came in as an arm's length investors who've decided this thing is much better than the urban setup. They have actually decided to take Chris to the Geshagi. I come from Kakamega, and I'll tell you for a fact, right now I have 8 greenhouses back in my village. I used to send my mother money every month. Nowadays, she feeds the whole village, and she's able to generate an income for herself. Remember, we are all used, even from the urban setup, we are used to one season per year, the perennial rainfall that we live in. Now, if you're able to cascade this concept from the urban setup with the technology and take it back to the village setup, trust you me, these problems of food shortage, this problem of starvation is a forgotten. But like Muchoro has said, we need to just regulate it and then cascade it down in the right manner. Don't go and promise someone 1.8 million, 1.1 million in 18 months. Be able to train them first that these are the do's and don'ts. And if you're able to observe these guidelines, then this is how much you'll make. But if you do not observe these guidelines, this is the loss that you'll make.
I'm looking at where you're operating. You said Kakamega County, you've had Nakuru County, and you're just looking towards, and this is right in the villages, especially because you can have expansive fields of land, tracts of land, where you can put in your greenhouses. Chris, I don't know from where you sit, because what we saw and what Mr. Montero mentioned is that this is kind of a sector that has many young people, many aspiring people who've just been in the industry and are going back to the farms. You know, people like yourselves have been in this industry 10, 20 years, 30 years. You know, how do you hold the hands of, you know, the kind of the investors who want to go into farming? Yes, they have the capital into it, but the expertise, the experience, the know-how is lacking.
Yeah, thank you. One of the issues is that when this concept of greenhouse farming generally, the smallholder kitty as it is, when it was marketed, I think the concept was given that once you have a greenhouse, then you can sit back and wait for the money. And that is exactly not correct. Because in the greenhouse, you create a very good environment for the crop to grow. Now, in the event there is a problem in the greenhouse, a disease comes in, or a pest, it also finds a very nice environment also to grow very fast. Now, we need expertise to understand how to manage inside a greenhouse. And that is what many people were not able to visualize or see from the beginning, because possibly the guys who are marketing the concept were too eager to make a sale. And they never said, yes, these are the advantages, but you have also these other issues that you need to take care of. You need to take care of scouting, which has to be done regularly. We recommend every 2 days, an expert eye must go into the greenhouse. Many of the people who are invested in the greenhouse are middle class working elsewhere. They leave that to somebody else who may not necessarily have the same interest as themselves to see this one succeed. So many of them have ended up in problems, and it has not succeeded. Now, when you are able to pull together, as the way this concept through Diamond Properties is going, then you are able to get the expertise that is required. And the cost now becomes economical. Because if, for example, I was to go and visit Edwin's farm with the 6 greenhouses, the costs will actually not be covered. He will have to pay me from his pocket. If I was to get that money from the same greenhouse, it will not be viable. But now with this concept of many people, each with a greenhouse in one place, then we are able to get expertise. We are able to get an economical marketing system. I can give you an example. The kienyeji eggs are in demand in Nairobi. You may have a farmer who has 3 hens somewhere in Nakuru. But despite having the eggs, there is no economical way of getting it to Nairobi. So you are there, demand is there, but you are not able to do it. Now, with the greenhouses being in one place, we are able to produce sufficient volume that then you can transport to the market areas economically.
All right. Thank you. I'm just looking towards, of course, that whole valuation or that whole kind of ecosystem, because there are lots of people involved. You know, you're looking at a lawyer, look at an agronomist, you're looking towards the greenhouse companies. What are the other services that you'd have underneath? But I'm going to come to that because we're just going to take up a quick call. I'm told there's a caller on the line. I don't know if you can hear us. If you could just pose your question right to the panels in studio right now.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, Jonah. Go right ahead.
Yes, my name is Jonah.
Yes, please.
Okay, I want to do fish farming.
Okay.
But the question is, where do you get this expert information? And which is the best company should I approach? And probably how much should I need? That's my question.
All right, I think I'll pose that to Chris. Jonah wants to go into fish farming. I have Flavio on the line next.
Yes, I'm Flavin. I'm from Homa Bay.
All right, Flavio, your question to the panel, please.
Nilikuwa nauliza, nilikuwa nimejaribu kupanda mambo na hoho, alafu kuvugavuga kuku, but the marketing sijui naweza pata aje.
Asante, Flavin. Emmanuel, I think that's to you, looking towards vegetables and how, of course, they can actually, kind of get to access the market. Boniface, I'm told, is on the line also. Boniface, your question to our panel, please.
Yes, my name is Boniface Wanjala from Kitengela. Yeah, I'm really, I would like to post this support to Mtoro because we need a regulator in this field. Right now I'm a pig farmer, but before that I bought some rabbits. So these guys enjoyed me that it can give me a lot of feedback, but they disappeared. You find that I spend around 350,000. So in my opinion, we need regulator in this field so that they can be able to protect these small farmers, because most of the money that we use is from loans. Actually, that's what I have to say for you.
Thank you very much, Boniface. Gentlemen, I think I really like the diversity of the questions that we've received. One, of course, looking towards market access. So you're going to take the question from Boniface Msamtoro just before I come to you. And, of course, Emmanuel, you look towards Flavin's response on our whole business. And Jonah, of course, Chris, you can respond to him. He's a fish farmer and looking towards how to expand. Before I come to you for the quick response to the question, Edwin, it's over to you. As you can see, there's a keen interest, proper interest, but you're kind of offering what I call a hub-spoke kind of a relation, in the sense that you have a lawyer on board, you have an agronomist. Who are some of the other experts you have in your system that you actually say will benefit an investor?
So there are different parties here. One is we have Diamond, the land selling company, because you need the land as a factor of production, which of course the future use, which is home ownership. But for now, we have a concept to bridge the gap, which is agribusiness. So we have a formidable company that will provide the greenhouses, and we've gone out through open tendering to make sure we have the most affordable in the market, because we provide a pool of buyers. Then we have the agronomist, who brings on board the team of experts, and the agronomists who come on board with all the team of experts. You need to have technical experts on the ground. You need to have field managers. To my cause, like we have one of a project that has over 1,000 greenhouses that has currently employed over 500 locals to just work on the farm. So you also need to have people who will just manage the logistics on the ground on behalf of the investors. How many people per greenhouse, how many times will they water, and all that. Then you have the insurance company that comes in to insure the whole concept. So as Emmanuel, as an investor, I don't need to go and get my own insurance company. I don't need to go and get my own agronomist to bring me the services. Then we have a professional security firm that understands the nature and the delicate nature of the situation, because you can have a whole greenhouse of strawberries that arrive for the market tomorrow, then you wake up the following day and all are gone. So we have a professional security firm on the ground to just manage, and first and foremost, and then looking further beyond that, and this mostly comes in with the expert, we have a marketing pool. So we have a pool that's always scouting for the market, who are likely to buy at what best price and all that. So we have a whole chain of command that has been put together for you. Now that is a breakaway from the older method, whereby you have an outgrower like Emmanuel, who must pay an expert like Chris to pay him a visit once or twice every week. Then when his yield is ready for the market, he must either transport to the market or go and fetch his for market himself. What is happening currently in some of our projects, we have large-scale buyers who come in periodically. Like we have someone who normally comes to collect his yield every Thursday. Okay. Then that is actually guaranteed.
All right. And of course, looking at that list of experts and what Chris had alluded to earlier, that's what you'd benefit from going at it together in a group. So let's just respond to our callers. Chris, if you just respond to Jonah, he's looking towards going into fish farming. What's your expert advice?
Yeah, fish farming or greenhouse farming, say vegetables or even chicken or any other small-scale farming, it is always critical to analyze once you get the product that you're producing, if it is fish, it is tomatoes or hoho, it is always good to analyze what is your target market before you start the business. Now, you must have a very clear line of how you will get a produce from your farm to the market. And this channel has to be efficient, because sometimes you have brokers in the rural area. They will tend to exploit you, because once your product is ready, then you are desperate to sell it. And they will try to make money from you. Now, once you go into investment of fish or tomatoes, it is always critical to ask yourself, once I get this produce, what is my target market? What volumes do I need to reach that target market? And then there is the gap between your farm and the market, transportation. Because sometimes people are producing, let's say, 2 crates of tomatoes or 3 crates of tomatoes from their greenhouse. How do you get that to the market? Say you are 10 kilometers from Nakuru town. We know there is a good market for tomatoes. But how do you get 2 crates to Nakuru? Do you hire a pickup? Do you get a mukokoteni? Do you use a boda boda? And what are the costs involved? And what remains for you at the end of the day? Many of the investors need to analyze. And sometimes it may be critical that you pull together if your size is not able to reach what we call economies of scale. Every business has to consider economies of scale for it to be beneficial to the investor.
Thank you, Chris. I just listening to you. Do you mean to say that there is a good market for tomatoes in Nakuru? Is that an expert advice that I can just quickly jump on?
Not exactly. But you know, Kenyans, basically, tomato consumption is widespread.
All right.
And the problem we have is many of the growers depend on ready-fed system.
Okay.
So when there is a problem in the production, prices go up. You know, when they flood again, prices go down. So most of the urban areas, you'll find market for tomatoes. The question is, at what time do you deliver the tomatoes?
I'm going to come back to you, and you can just maybe do a quick map into what exactly are some of the quick wins that farmers can go into. But Edwin, you seem to have a quick response really quickly.
The demand on tomatoes. Laban, trust you me not, Kenya currently imports some of the tomato products, the fine refined tomato products. There's no large-scale company currently that has gone into setting up a plant. For example, Del Monte would want the tomato pulp to produce the tomato juice, tomato paste, tomato sauce, and all that. But there's no one currently who set up a farm to produce, because one, we had the gap in production. Most of us are seasonal producers or seasonal growers. Now, right now, in one of the farms, we're setting up a 50 million plant to just do the crushing. And once you've crushed and you've done all the processing, you will be able to sell both locally and globally. That therefore mean there's no way you'll get away where you have an oversupply in the market. It's all about laying the right structures.
Do you have any partners abroad? And
We have local partners currently who are setting up. Actually, one of our service providers is the one who's pioneering the concept. Right. They've done their own market survey, they've done the feasibilities, and some of the large-scale buyers have actually committed. If you can be able to produce and process, we will package, brand, and sell it.
All right, great. Emmanuel, Flavin wants to go into hoho farming. What's your advice?
I think one of the mistakes that we make as farmers is to put the cart before the horse. We go into the farming technical aspect of it before doing our market survey. Just as Chris has said, we need to know what market we are going to serve, what is the capacity of that market, how far is it from our reach, and how frequently will they be buying from us. So that should inform your decision also on your land. Because if, let's say, your market wants 200 kilos of tomatoes every week, is your farm able to produce that kind of tomato? And if not, what part of that demand are you going to meet? So one, you can stagger your production to know that tomatoes are a perishable crop. So you cannot produce all at the same time. You need to know how each period is going to be planned out. So one, my advice to her would be, look at the market around you. How much tomatoes do they use every week or every day? Then go back to your farm and look at how much can I be producing for this farm, so that at every other time, when the tomatoes are ready, I can be able to just pluck and get it to the market. Also, be able to negotiate. Are they going to come for the tomatoes in the farm, which gives you a lesser price? Or am I going to do the extra bit of taking it to the market, which might give you a more profitable margin?
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Mtoro, I'm keen to know, are you a farmer yourself?
Yes, I think I would say yes, small scale farmer.
So, and of course, because the attention now is just looking towards, you know, people who've actually, I'd say now, burned their fingers. And
Yes.
as in business, of course, you'd say it's okay to burn your fingers because, you know, you get your lessons and you learn from it. But we have a Boniface here who seemed to have actually burned his hand because
Yes, yes.
he was a pig farmer and a rabbit farmer and is invested into such an agribusiness venture, but has lost his investment. So first of all, the legal mechanisms, what's your advice onto that? And, you know, how would even such a person come back into...
I think it's very interesting. I think we need to look back. In fact, the whole concept of agribusiness, in my view, is some sort of an innovation out of an industry that collapsed. When we were growing up, a story was told. Actually, not a story, it was a reality. That 70% of our economy depended on agriculture. And economy and agriculture can only mean one thing: production and the market. What happened with those two things? Production is still up to date. Of course, other than, of course, the cost of input and all those things. But what disappeared is the market. The gentlemen on this panel, they are raising very good things. But they will tell you the most challenging bit. Have listened very keenly. I have not even heard whether this industry, like many others, is immune from cartels in the market. He called them brokers. What will stop anybody from undercutting the farmer in this industry by finding a mechanism reselling the same produce? So I think the emphasis here, including the caller who has a problem, is always about the market. If you can have direct access to the market as a farmer, those days you did not have to go through many middlemen and all those kind of issues. For example, during the times you have a market glut or flooding of these particular products, I'm happy. Edwin is talking about futuristic plans, which are all good, but of course talking about present and past, is that when we have a flooding of the market, then of course prices are compromised. Nobody's talking about, for example, the fish farmer in Western Kenya about storage. That's why it makes it cheaper to have fish, I think in Thika and other places, or Nairobi, but more expensive in places where they produce like Kisumu. And it's actually, for me, it's not nuclear science. It's just a basic thing like storage. If I know I have a consumption of a steady nature, I need to produce for this talk about seasons, you know. Consumer is for all seasons. The consumer is not for 8 months. So I think we need to look at the industry and really address those kind of gaps. How do we ensure that there's no sporadic deficits or probably overproduction within certain seasons? It's actually about storage. And it affects things like potatoes. When Mr. Kimunya was at Treasury, I think he was talking about something he was doing in Nyauru or wherever, where they could be able to store this. I think some investor had come to do those kind of things. So what this industry should be doing is not just for them to sell land, it's not just for them to produce. I think they need to assure Mutoro and the caller and everybody else who want to invest that you can have direct access to the market. If that is not done, it's not going to be sustainable.
For Boniface now,
Yes.
what will happen to you? Can they seek any legal...
Boniface, what he needs to do,
yeah.
and I think this is painful reality. If he's watching, I'll actually look at him in the eye and tell him, Boniface, the only reason why you went wrong is that you assumed you knew what you did not know. Now that you know, and by the way, we need to thank NTV. This is the first time I'm seeing this kind of conversation on national television. So people do not know, but they assume they know. They think you need just land, produce, and then you're done. And no, I think it takes more than that. So we need to have more of these conversations, and I think NTV should do more than this.
All right.
Yeah.
Grace, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, I would like to add a comment on that, economies of scale is something that gets ignored by many investors. And it is extremely critical when you look at providing the technical knowledge for production so that you are getting an economical product. When you look at management, when you look at marketing, economies of scale comes in. And when an individual has this urge to invest in a certain, like now agribusiness, whether it's rabbit farming or fish farming, the issue of how do I attain scale should be very critical. That's why I think what is happening with the agribusiness, for example, through Diamond, becomes a very nice concept that needs to be supported and people to become less anxious of when there is a small problem. For example, we have many mobile phone service providers. Not all of them have been successful. Some have gone under. Have we stopped using phones? Some are very successful in Kenya today. Supermarkets, some are thriving, others are in trouble. We have not blushed away supermarkets. Now, if an industry has a problem on one side, it's not fair to thrash it and say, oh, it's not good, or the people who are behind it are trying to excite us unnecessarily. It is a question of looking at what would have gone wrong. What is it that we did not do correctly? Yeah. Because in my view, for example, when we discuss with Diamond on what we will do as a service provider, one of the requirements we had was we must have a minimum number of greenhouses, below which we are not willing to get into the contract.
Is that what you, like in terms of breaking even? So
exactly.
What should actually have economies of scale?
Economies of scale, yeah. Because like now we are managing one of the phase for Diamond. If I don't reach a certain volume, then I cannot go as myself to negotiate directly with the market to supply.
True.
I cannot get an expert also to work for me and compensate them sufficiently.
True.
Yes.
I want to move into Edwin really quickly because we have an SMS short code, and I know that comes in from your company. We're going to share that on screen right now. But even as we share the short code and to the responses and how people can just get more details, I'm sure it's quite hard to compress it in an hour right now. Yeah. But just Edwin, what's the difference between the relationship actually between the real estate companies and agribusiness? Because some people will actually, there's that push towards owning a house, owning a home. Yeah. But what you have is that you're offering a lot more than that.
Well, you'll agree with me that Kenyans have been buying and owning land within the urban setup more than ever in the past couple of years, either as a form of investment or as a future plan to own a home. But for futuristic, you're looking at the next 4 or 5 years. Look at Kitengela. Whoever bought land in Kitengela 5 years ago can simply convert it to a home. But what happened between the time they bought the land and when they're putting it to use right now? The land was idle. So you've just gotten a way of making that land active or fertile or productive to bridge that gap of 5 years. We all know in the next 5 years or so, we have technological advancement, and that nice house that would have costed you 5 million now with the normal brick and mortar, in a couple of years time with technological advancement, it might even cost you less, probably 2 million. But trust you me, you'll need a piece of land to construct that home, as long as or as much as home ownership is a dream of any Kenyan living in urban centers. So we are providing that land in a gated community more or less set up. We're not talking about lands that are remotely hidden. No, these are lands where we've done in terms of research, in the next 3 to 4 years, these are habitable places. You can build up your nice 4-bedroom mansionette or bungalow and live there. And it's a gated community, security, electricity, and water provided. What you're doing right now is you're using all those amenities to do something else under the name of agribusiness, guided by the experts. But a time is coming in 4 years, 5 years, like what you're doing in Konza right now. We have a timeline of 3 years. Exactly in 3 years, Chris will put aside all the greenhouses and will embark into home ownership. So that is our guideline, and that's our research-based approach towards real estate. And that's why real estate comes in and merges with agribusiness. So Diamond does not do agribusiness. We only bring in the experts who will do it on your behalf.
Is that now to make sure that the land doesn't stay bare?
The land does not stay bare. This thing of subdividing land and selling bare land in urban centers is creating an economical crisis. We are not taking away the fact that there's housing shortage. We are not taking away the fact that there's food shortage. But you realize in the next couple of years, Nairobi would be probably 30 to 40% of Nairobi will be bare, but under what you call speculative investments. This land belongs to Laban Cliff, and it's just an eighth, meaning even a foreign investor coming up and they want to set up a Nyayo high-rise kind of estate, they can't because it's already demarcated and owned by the end consumers.
Okay. Yep. All right. We're getting to the tail end of this discussion, but feel free to just reach out to us at AM Live NTV, at NTV Kenya, at Laban Cliff, and we'll be able to just pose your last questions to the panel even as we go along. But Emmanuel, taking you back 2 years ago, sterling banking career, do you want to go back now to the bank, or are you comfortable in the firms?
I can say banking taught me a lot of patience and service to customers, where you learn how to put your customers first, which I think is an important aspect of your business. So going back, I don't think so. I think farming has had its fair bulk of challenges, but I can say it's fulfilling.
somebody's thinking, somebody's where you are 2 years ago, right now. What would you tell them?
First, there's some mistakes I made, which I wish I did differently. As I mentioned earlier, seek expert advice. It does not necessarily have to be a very big agronomical body. You can seek someone who's in agribusiness and who's done it before. They can walk you through the do's and don'ts. And then two, it's definitely a part that us as young people need to come and play. And I think part of the discussion that we've not demarcated is there's the entrepreneur and there's the investor. I think Diamond Property is an entrepreneur who has investors investing in their business for them to use agribusiness as a value add to real estate. And for me, I'm an entrepreneur who's taken the risk, who has seen the opportunities, assumes the risk of the business, runs the business, wakes up every day to run this business and see it grow to something bigger than what they started with. So I think part of the conversation that should be addressed is, yes, you can have a full-time job and invest in agribusiness. And Diamond Properties provide such an avenue for you to invest and sit comfortably and see your investment grow. But if you want to run the business itself, that's when you have to put your boots on, take the risk. It's going to be hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but definitely nothing good comes easy. So you have to be there, be consistent, be patient, and it's definitely going to pay out.
All right, going back to the firms and ensuring that, of course, we're not just armchair farmers or telephone farmers. I'm going to come back to you, Edwin, for our closing remarks really briefly. But before that, Mr. Mtoro, a lot of issues that have just come up. Indeed, that of course these sectors, Chris mentioned there's telecommunication, there's the retail sector. Of course, we know what is happening right now, which is of course is also a threat. I mean, we've seen Brookside being one of the top creditors, Nakumatt creditors, and of course you can imagine the ripple effect it will have to the farmers right to the ground. So I think you really have your work cut out.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's important that I actually say you are not a consumer before the market. So you need the market. But some of the problems that we are having, I think, can be avoided. They don't have to be repeated. You know, these are things that I think will be very interesting. For example, so our call will be, let's have a regulator. Let's also have some self-regulation. Diamond Properties and their counterparts, if they can come together, form some kind of an association where they set some minimums in terms of behavior. Where they have some minimums, because if they don't have minimums, we cannot be gamble. I mean, the work of a consumer is actually to spend and then get value for money. The work of the consumer is not to gamble. If one company today collapses, the consumer is going to support another. So actually we need to separate the consumer from the back end. Lastly, I think it's also important when you call yourself a consumer. By the way, this is one country that we take on average probably 12 to 16 hours every day looking for money. 12 to 16 hours, probably even some more. But we take less than 5 minutes to spend that money. Meaning we have no time for shopping. I keep telling people, in other countries you'll find people with PhDs in shopping. You have to plan your purchases. If you really want to get an investment, I mean really, you don't wake up because you've got a loan from your employer, or because you had your friend was able to make this, or because you had a popular radio presenter saying you have a guarantee on this. No, I think take your time and go to an organization like COFEC, will give you free advice. Or actually go to an expert, pay a little money, but get value for your money. So as it is, I think it has a future, but let's do more as consumers, let's do more as government, let's do more as private sector.
All right. Yeah. Speaking of media personalities, I should say I'm not endorsing any land buying ventures. But Edwin, just to wrap this up, self-regulation. Why don't you all just come together, set the rules of the game, approach the ministry, and just make sure that this is just a clean industry?
Work in progress. I should tell you, as we speak right now, we have a real estate leaders forum. We meet once every month at Capital Club, and we have a few steps. The first step was to form a company, come up with the bare minimum requirements, and of course, once everything has been set, we set the bare minimum rules in terms of do you endorse you in terms of the length of service in the industry, successful projects, while keeping your word as far as the promise goes. And then once we get to that level, we'll get now to involve the government. But also I must inform you that the media has a role to play. Mr. Mtoro has a role to play. Remember, today I'll wake up as Edwin and have 50 acres in Kitengela and I want to sell. I don't need anyone to regulate me. I don't need to belong to anybody. All I need to do is have marketing budget. I'll subdivide, I'll come to NTV and tell them, listen, this is the land and it has a greenhouse. Say this and say that. Now, the media's role is to safeguard the consumer. Just have an extra, go an extra mile. You have a team of legal experts. It does not take a day for someone to go to the ground and verify and justify that the land really belongs to Edwin.
All right.